Well, I'm Kent Zimmerman. I am a Presbyterian, so just to put this in context for you, buddy.
You are forgiven.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. But one of my best friends is an Episcopalian, as I referred to earlier. Now, just to give you a little context, there are two things that I want to do right at this front end very quickly. First of all, I want to amplify what Melissa said with two stories. As I was thinking about all the intergenerational, and in particular your question about mission and mission trips and so forth. I've had two experiences in the last several years where that whole notion of intergenerational groups facilitating international travel and what was required. The first one I'll tell you about is I'm a member of the Des Moines Rotary Club. All right, we have a club called the Interact Club, all right, which is for all the young people, the younger generation. And one of the things that happened in the Rotary Club is the community service group came up with an idea of trying to do a mission trip to help with the water issues in Uganda, as well as access to medical care. So what they did is they actually put together, I think they've done like 4 mission trips now, all right? But they took the young people were part of it, the old guys were part of it, all right? And oh, by the way, they all went through at least 3 or 4 months worth of training on the culture that they were walking into and what all those things are about. So that whole notion of intergenerational education as it relates to a mission trip. The other one that I would share with you is I'm on the board of an organization in Des Moines called Above and Beyond Cancer. Above and Beyond Cancer mission is to elevate the lives of those people touched by cancer to create a healthier world. All right? One of the ways we do that is mission trips internationally to places like, well, the one that Richard and I did was to Nepal. All right, we climbed the 3rd highest mountain in the Himalayas. All right, but that trip, we started education 4 months in advance, all right, on food, culture, everything there was to know about dealing with the Nepalese, especially if you were in the mountains. And of course, along the way, we also had to figure out whether we could climb. So we had physical training twice a week, all right? But the group was very interesting. I was, at that time, 74 years of age. That was like 3 years ago, all right? And the youngest person was 18. So we had a whole intergenerational family that really bonded as we were climbing the mountain, if you would call it. And we then also did mission work with the local cancer center, which is basically like a hospice. So that whole notion of what you brought up about intergenerational groups coming together, you got to give them a reason, though, that they all buy into. All right? If they don't buy into it, it's not going to work. It won't work at all. It can't be your trip. It's got to be our trip.
It's mutual.
Yep, absolutely. So that's my 2 stories, just to amplify your whole point, which I think is really very valid. And I'm fascinated by it because I also work with a nursing home, and I started to think of, well, we have young kids from the high school serving meals. We have older residents. We have 200 volunteers on a monthly basis that are all very much, I'll call it my generation and younger, just doing stuff. And so all of a sudden you start to see this, well, that really, how do we keep amplifying that? And I think church is the same issue in a lot of ways, okay? Couple of bits of background. We're going to talk about community leaders, all right? When the bishop called about doing something on growing Iowa leaders, I said, oh, all right, let's see. When did I do that pitch? Oh, that was like 5 years ago, 7 years ago. Well, you can see from the date on this, it was 2009. So I had to resurrect a prior life in order to kind of get back into this thing. And I don't mean that in any negative sense, because one of the things that I've learned over the last, I would say probably 20 years or 25 years, I'm fascinated with how small towns work and how challenging some of those things can be. And so when I was originally, back in 2007, my wife died of cancer. But before she died, she said, "You're going to have something to do, all right? And your quote, you can't just retire." She said, "That's the only way you'll survive." And so I said, okay. Well, my good friend, Pastor Richard Graves, at that time, was the executive director of a place called the Wallace House Foundation, which honors the memories of Henry A. Wallace, and was his, in fact, growing up home in Des Moines. And so Richard decided he was going to go back into the priesthood. So I think he's doing a gig over in Council Bluffs today, I'm not sure. And so I applied for the job, and lo and behold, I got the job. Of course, I've been working with their board of directors on how to build a business plan for the future and reinvent the organization. And I guess I probably had an inside track, but who knows, all right? And anyway, at that time, I had also spent a lot of time in the previous 5 to 8 years working in a community called Perry, Iowa. I don't know if any of you have all been to Perry. There's a terrific hotel there called the Hotel Patee. I was in on the original startup of all of that back in the mid-90s. And my job was working with the community, all right, which was where I learned a whole lot of stuff. So what you're going to see today is something that actually translated into a consulting practice for me, all right, on the side, so to speak. And the minute we got involved in small town reinvention in Iowa, that led to a further discussion, which brought my pastor friend and a good Lutheran, so we had the Lutheran, the Presbyterian, and the Episcopalian, all right, working with small town churches, all right, on how to reinvent or reimagine yourself. And so what you'll see today is what some of the framework and the background that's gone into some of this stuff. The afternoon session, I have no idea what I'm going to do, except there are 2 options that will probably, I did like your framework about what the afternoon would be. What I'm going to do is take you through a whole leadership thing as it relates to community building. And I want you to think about your involvement in your own communities as we go through this. And I'm going to ask you to actually grade your communities, all right? And we can do, on the left-hand side, we can put the town that you're from, and that's a grade. You can also do the same thing with the church. I've never tried it, but you might want to try it, all right? Because we're going to get into a whole bunch of factors on which you can begin to rate and look for. You're going to start to see both problems and opportunities and where new light can be shed. So let me begin by saying that one of the first starting points for me was the whole notion of what's leadership. All right, and so I'm going to put some words up. You guys can add to them about what are leaders? What do they do? All right, and then we're going to go to what I call smart community leverage points. All right, some of the common words for community leaders are goals. They set the morals and the values for a community. Control, success, achievement. Throw out some other ones that you guys would like to describe. Who's the best leaders that you've got, that you've seen, and what are some of the characteristics that they have? Anybody got any?
Motivation.
Motivation, great addition. Anybody? Vision, absolutely, great.
Collaborative.
What?
Collaborative.
Collaborative, oh, big.
Compassion.
So is vision too.
Compassion.
What?
Compassion.
Compassion, absolutely. Anybody else? All right, so I'm going to give you a definition, and I can't remember, presentation is so old, I can't remember where I got the quote. Okay, so it's not, leadership creates an environment for people citizens, you and me, to come together to attack problems, leverage opportunities that confront them. Leadership connects. Connect is a huge word, all right, and catalyzes action toward common interests. You know, whoever gave the old boy network, all right, I'm using a bad term now, guys, all right? Whoever gave the old boy network permission to tell us how we ought to be running our lives, all right? That's one of the things that I learned coming out of Chicago about, oh my God, what happens in small towns? My goodness gracious. Those 6 guys that sit in the coffee shop and try and dictate everything, right? Does that go on? Does that go on? You guys seen that one before? All right. So anyway, take notes. This is the slide presentation, all right? So you're welcome to take any notes you want along the way. That's the top sheet. We're going to get to another one in a minute. But anyway, leadership in the community context is what I call that. And I think the important word is connection and catalyze. All right? Now, one of the things that happens to me in oddball places is my late wife and I were doing a final trip to Williamsburg, Washington, D.C., and we wound up in Charlottesville, Virginia. All right, the home of Thomas Jefferson. I'm sure a lot of you have probably been there. All right? And one of the things that I discovered along the way is, being the loyal Presbyterian that I was, my former pastor had moved to the First Presbyterian Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. So one night when we were there, we called and said, oh, let's have dinner. So we went over to their house and sat down. And I told Sam, by the way, he is now the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Iowa City, so he came back to Iowa. Couldn't handle that, you know, all that other stuff out east. Anyway, Sam said, well, you're doing all that community work. I've got a great friend, you know, living in Charlottesville, who's written a book on communities and been studying it for any number of years. And I said, well, tell me about it. Okay, so fast forward. Her name is Suzanne Morse. She wrote a book called Smart Communities. Put it down on your list to buy. And Suzanne has been a researcher and writer on what the ingredients are in a smart community. Now, if you go part way down, and I'll read you her bio, you've got a scorecard called the Smart Communities Scorecard. I'm going to involve you in this, and I'm going to ask questions. All right? Go all the way down, pick it up. It's probably about 2/3 of the way through the paper. Not in the stapled version, but there'll be one there. It's like, yeah, like you get close. Keep going. It's about the 5th one down. There it is. All right? All right? You get it? Yeah, I know, that's there. Here, you got it? All right. Anyway, you'll see the scorecard. What I want to do is carry you through a real quick excerpt of Suzanne's book about how citizens and local leaders can use strategic thinking to build a brighter future. I'll probably use an example or two as I go through. And what I just want to tell you that we brought at the Wallace House Suzanne to Des Moines to do a whole lecture series, all right, on smart communities that was open to the community, all the economic development folks and so forth. And Suzanne, right now, Dr. Suzanne Morse is president of Civic Change, Inc. It's the successor organization to the Pew Partnership for Civic Change. In the organization's almost 20-year history, her vision has made it a national leader in shaping the conversation on community success, civic leadership, and civic engagement. From 2009 to 11, she was a research associate and professor of urban and environmental planning in the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia. She has a special interest in the role that citizens play. And that's what I want to really get into of what I think is a real opportunity that we in the churches and our communities actually have. But it isn't doing business as usual. So Let me begin the process by saying she's got 7 leverage points that I want to kind of briefly discuss. I will likely maybe read a, quote, her overview of that section. And then I'm going to ask you, all right, did I?
We need to do the back.
Oh, what do we, oh, the battery?
Yeah.
Sorry. Time out.
I think it's dead.
Is it? Okay.
We're supposed to.
It's all right. Take your time. You know, take- been down this road before. Gosh, we're back in business.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent technology around here. Anyway, here are her 7 leverage points. All right, you've got them on the slides, and we're going to go through them one by one. And I'm going to review each from her point of view, and then we're going to grade your community and grade your church. All right, on these things. Number 1, investing right the first time. Number 2, working together. 3, building on community strengths, really important. Practicing democracy. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Do we practice democracy in our small towns? Well, sometimes we don't do a good job of that, I don't think. Preserving the past. I think we're doing a pretty good job here, by the way. That may not necessarily be as appropriate as we need to be. Growing leaders and inventing a brighter future. And Suzanne has really done I call it a very simple but very effective job at describing each of these. And so what I want to do is get the right gizmo. Investing right the first time. We must define our efforts for the long haul. Short-term programs don't do it. Okay, you can test it in the short term, but it better be designed for long term. We don't have enough time anymore to screw around with stuff that doesn't work for the long haul. We have to think strategically about how we invest, what will give us the greatest return, costs of not investing in a particular strategy. All right? To my way of thinking, with the way Suzanne described it in her book, and pardon me for doing this, but I thought this was kind of one. Whoa! Sorry about that. It's like, I'm not used to all these gizmos at once. Investing right the first time. Examine strategies for community investing. There are many issues that are potential community investments. Communities have to weigh priorities and the anticipated return of certain investments. You know, we all argue for one thing and it may not really be the best thing for us in the long haul. Specifically, we look at particular community issues, dropout prevention, an issue that has far-reaching effects on a whole community. Let me give you an example of something that I ran into probably 25 years ago. Ultimately brought it to Iowa, and it's called a tutoring program for a church. All right? At Fourth Presbyterian Church in downtown Chicago, they have approximately 600 tutors that actually tutor young kids at the church twice a week, all right, from the nearby Cabrini Green poverty area. All right, the kids are brought over. They are a one-on-one mentor with each one of them. We brought that to Des Moines, and the answer when we brought it to Des Moines as an idea for Central Presbyterian Church, it was, well, we don't have any poor people. No. You know, I mean, it's like, it's back to the point of, all right, open your eyes, folks. There are opportunities where the church can interact with young people in a way that's a very positive thing. And so for the last 25 years, Central has been doing it. They have 25 or 30 students that come over from one of the Oak Ridge neighborhood, which is a low income, now multi-diverse area in the city. They get one-on-one work with a tutor, and they get dinner, which goes with it. So it's a whole notion of how do you reach out and invest in the right things, all right? And what they've found is, guess what? Tutors beget more tutors. And young people don't mind tutoring other young people. So, and also the intergenerational group of, oh, you're retired? You could really be a helpful mentor to a younger person, all right? So, that's number one on Suzanne's list, investing right the first time. Working together. All right, I think this should probably be in boldface type and about twice as big. Because in my view, one of the biggest and hardest things to do in the public domain is how do you work together? We must define new relationships and better ways of public decision making to forge trust between diverse groups and create an understanding that we are all in this together. Communities have the capacity to meet challenges and opportunities directly and multilaterally if they organize themselves to act. And I'm going to share an example with you in just a minute. Community partnerships are motivated by self-interest and common interest. When we did some work in Belle Plaine, Iowa, I don't know if you guys have been over Belle Plaine in the last several years, but it's undergone quite a transformation. One of the things that was most interesting is what we did is we invited the high school class to participate in a community visioning and reinvention project. We invited all the churches to participate. We invited the city council to participate. We invited the board of supervisors to participate. I think we invited the police department to be there too. And in the end, we had 100 people come out to go through a visioning process over a period of several different months. And the important part, by the way, we held it at 7 o'clock at night. All right, we did have to arrange transportation for the older generation who didn't like to go out at night. And in that process, it's amazing when you start asking people about their community, about what they see as the strengths and weaknesses, when you start to see the laundry list that develops itself. And oh, by the way, that goes with churches too. Great fun on a Sunday morning to put the whole congregation in the same place and start asking them those questions. Excuse me. Doesn't always happen with an insider doing it. Sometimes you got to have an outsider that helps facilitate that process. But anyway, working together, a very important point of getting anything done. And I'm sure you all realize that. But how many of you are on the same committee all the time, right? Or it's the same group of 22 people that are taking care of this place. Building on community strengths. There's an organization at a Northwestern University called the Asset-Based Development Corporation, called ABC, all right? And it has made a huge difference in a lot of communities across the country and across the world on building on strengths. Looking at what the strengths are of the organizations, the institutions that we have in our communities and in our churches. Most citizens don't know their community assets. If you sit down and you say, so what are your community assets? Like, well, I don't know. We think about more problems than that. That's why I was asking the lady from Pittsburgh there about, okay, why was that community successful? Was it just because they practiced some of these ideas of working together, building on their strengths and their assets? Do you have an answer for it?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
In the 60s and 70s, our community was overrun with people from the mob. And our mayor was one of them. And that really put a damper on what was going on, not only
Absolutely, yeah.
on the public level, but on the spiritual level, because they were afraid to worship outside of the church. When they were all incarcerated, they started to look up. People were more willing to go out on that limb and,
Okay,
to
and
start
participate in the
yeah,
process, right?
Big time.
Okay. Well, now you guys know, right? If the mob is ever in your town,
Just call
just
it
get rid of them, right? Because then it'll open you up to the future. So Anyway, building on community strengths. Most citizens don't know the human, physical, and organizational capacities. Communities tend to have a half full or a half empty, and I've seen too many that have a half empty complex. You know, it's like, oh, there's something wrong, right? Well, what's good about it? Sustainable community building happens when the public is engaged and when the community has a sense of itself and its inner strengths. And by the way, the churches are an inner strength, among other things, all right? But we don't always look at that. You know, it's like, oh, well, that's somebody else's responsibility, the community. Practicing democracy. Again, I harken back to the days when too many decisions are made in small towns by 6 guys at 6 o'clock in the morning having coffee, right? Been there, done that, seen that, all right? And it just doesn't work, all right? On the other hand, you could also say that democracy is messy, all right? It isn't just easy because we all have opinions when we're walking it. So how you collaborate and work together towards common goals is really the important part. Successful communities are marked by decision-making that allows dialogue, discussion, and real input. And by the way, the churches can be real assets at doing that, all right? That was the one thing that I learned really intentionally from the Wallace House experience and the dialogue. Everybody, the Wallace family was always known for solving the problems of the world at the dinner table, all right? It was a dialogue that would go on. How many of us do that every Sunday or whatever? But you start to take that model into a bigger framework and it works there too, all right? Active participation of a broad range and a large number of citizens, not just those with formal decision-making authority. Public dialogue, not debate. This is not my idea versus yours. This is what are we working on together. Provides the opportunity to join with others to learn, discuss, and understand multiple perspectives. Public dialogue fosters win-win. How many times have we seen too many things going on in secret, right? And the next thing you know, you're reading them in the paper, right? Which, like, not probably good, all right? And doesn't foster good relationships within the community. So, next, preserving the past. A city without old buildings is like a person without memory. I loved looking at the church next door, by the way. I haven't been inside, but I have a funny feeling it's probably kind of cool. All right, you know? I've been to the one, what is it, in Fort Dodge and in Webster City. And small, intimate, very warm, I'll bet. A city without old buildings like a person without a memory. Communities can reclaim history and culture to create a larger vision for the future. Historic preservation is a smart investment for aesthetics and beauty and can be for economic development. There are a lot of things that are starting to happen with congregations that I've noted, and that is that simply, you know, back 25, 30 years ago, we all built big buildings, social halls, not unlike this. What happens to them other than they're used on Sunday morning or maybe Saturday night a little bit, and the rest of the time it's sitting vacant? How do these assets get used in a way that would be, are we still getting okay on there? Fine. All right. And I think there's a whole lot of discussion now starting to happen about, well, what do we do with these buildings that we built that we don't have the size or the scope to actually use them? So how could they be repurposed? And what is that all about? So one of the things that I think is a really important thing going forward, I love that notion of repurpose. This winter I was in a place called Marfa, Texas. Anybody ever heard of Marfa, Texas? Population 4,500, West Texas. All right? Old ranch community. All right? That has now created a whole new industry, which the locals weren't too happy about necessarily to begin with, which is really, Marfa became the winter studio for a very famous modern artist by the name of Donald Judd. Huge sculptor, all right? And now what is it? What is it? The big, people are coming from all over the world to see the art collections that one artist from New York City who fell in love with this area of the country, wanted to get away from New York, all right? Established his winter studio out there, and now what happened was back in the early 70s, I think it was, or mid 70s, he bought an army base that had been put up for sale, and it used to be the army base that would house the prisoners from World War II, all right, Russians, Germans, etc. It was essentially a prison, all right? The army sold it for $1. Anyone didn't mind, nobody else wanted it. Judd bought it, turned over each of the 7 buildings to one building to each of one of his buddy artists in New York and said, do anything you want. It's your building, all right? Now, when you go there, there are 7 or 8 buildings that you tour, all right? You have to sign up online. You have to pay a fairly big buck, like $100 for the tour that lasts 7 hours, all right? All these huge, it's transformed the community. If you watch what's happened to it, all right? Now hotels being built, one's being renovated, studios been turned into an attraction, and you had, when we were there, it was like, okay, we were from Des Moines, Iowa. There were 2 women that had driven an RV from Florida, all right? They were doing Travels with Charlie. I mean, it was just like incredible, the number of people that were kind of finding out about this. Well, it didn't help that a center spread in the New York Times travel section on Sunday back in December didn't hurt it. All right, I think it gained awareness, but an incredible thing. But again, small town, 4,500 people. All right, and the town and the community and the art group are now focusing on how do they work together, because there was fear to begin with. All right, so anyway, preserving the past, quite interestingly, repurposing. All right, 3 slides coming up on leaders, growing leaders, trends affecting community leadership, demographic diversity, the need for local decision making. Issues are now complex and really interrelated. You know, I mean, I think you pointed out the whole notion of what you learned with the government folks. I mean, in terms of your study, I thought, what's impacting our families? And how do we deal with that? I think it's a huge challenge for everybody. Communities need leaders from the ranks and the rank and file. Too many times it becomes, you know, it's the mayor, it's the chairman of this board or that board or the economic town, and you know, who they forget? They just forget the property owners that are living there. You know, it's like, okay, wait, maybe there's more we can learn from all these. Communities need leaders from the ranks and rank and file. Leadership occurs when individuals step up to the plate on important issues and when there is a place for them to be heard. It's about we, not me. I always reflect on the thing that happened to us in Belle Plaine. Once we got kind of a picture of what we wanted to have happen, all right, the organization of a creation of a new collaborative group to involve itself with implementing the future vision of that community became a reality. It was no longer the city council being responsible. It was now multiple people being involved in that process and comfortable with each other. Because you know what? They'd spent the time talking to each other, listening to each other, etc. Growing leaders too. Long-term progress requires a sense of ownership and responsibility that touches more than the usual cast of characters. Self-explanatory. When work is the focus in the community, not the personalities. When getting the job done, not work. When getting the job done or making a museum a reality or improving the sidewalks or, you know, building a new addition to the local school or transforming it, everybody wins. Strong, broad-based leadership is essential to community success. Communities that rely on one industry, one family, or one perspective have missed the ideas, the resources, and involvement of many. Success requires sustained effort. I want to come back to this one in a minute with just a brief example. Success requires sustained effort, organization of the work, and collective vision and action. Too many times we talk about it, but we don't organize for it, that I've seen. And good community leadership needs to represent the political, business, and citizen leadership. And I underscore too many times it's this or this, and it's not this. All right? And leadership must be part of a strategic investment. We got to invest in our leaders. We got to give them training. We got to give them support, whatever it is necessary. Let me give you a quick example of something that I learned about this one very early on in my career. Never thought I'd ever come back to it. All right? Back in the 70s, one of my clients was the Kohler Company. You guys ever heard of the Kohler Company, the plumbing guys? You know? They do those outrageous commercials, some of them, on television. And I was handling the advertising. All right? And the chairman of the board is a guy by the name of Herb Kohler. He and I are now about the same age. And one night, Herb came in he didn't like to work, he only liked to work, start at noon and work till 8 or 9. All right? He wasn't one of those. The rest of the plant, everybody was coming to, 7:30 in the morning, right? They're quitting at 4:30, normal, all right? Well, one night Herb came into a new products meeting, and he was a very creative individual. Really nice, very creative. Sometimes a little too creative for his own good, I think. And said, I have an idea. And we said, and you weren't sure whether you should just hold on to your wallet or what was going to come up next, okay? Well, Herb came up with this idea about taking a building that had been built for the immigrants that they brought over from Germany to work in the foundry in Kohler, Wisconsin. All right? Pretty standard. That would go on. All right? And it really didn't have any use anymore. And so Herb comes in one night and says, I think what we ought to do is transform that into a boutique hotel. Okay, Herbert, you're on a 2-lane highway, takes an hour and a half to get here from Milwaukee. If you're coming up from Chicago, it's probably about 3.5 hours or 4. I said, you're crazy. Nobody in their right mind is going to come to Kohler, Wisconsin, all right, to stay in this hotel. Oh, I think we could make something happen. So I said, well, I'm against it, but let's go. So Herbert decided to go forward with his idea. Well, if you fast forward today, Kohler is no longer dependent on plumbing for its income for its citizens. It has developed a huge tourism industry, which they've added to that hotel 7 times, all right? They have like 6 restaurants. They have 2 or 3 golf courses. I remember when they built a hunting club. It's an incredible story. It's one of America's 5-star resorts. Guess what? And I told him he was crazy, right? So that tells you how much I know about community work, right? All right, but
don't you wish you bought into it?
yeah, but it was incredible watching it kind of develop and then watching it even from afar. But it's where I learned that whole notion of, okay, what they did is they actually helped balance out what happened when the building business would go down, the tourism business, in theory, they could create. So at least the community was guaranteed now of full employment, basically. And people came in from all over the world, and they still do. And by the way, I think that's where the PGA is going to be this year. I can't remember. But anyway, it's that kind of thought process and visioning that started to happen. Of course, it's always nice if your name is on the door and you can control the agenda, but that's, I won't go into I don't know how democratic it was at that particular point. I think it was probably not democratic, but we'll go from there. All right? Inventing a brighter future. Most people are interested in where they came from inventors are interested in where are they going. I think too often we look backward as opposed to looking forward, realizing how things have changed. All right? What can we do to take what's gone on in our society and move it forward in a positive way? The recipe for community success rests on the community's ability to invent the structure, process, and leadership to make long-term change. All right, so go back to your scorecard. All right? You guys got a scorecard there in front of you, right? Now I want you to take it, all right? It's about the, fifth sheet down. I want you to rate your community on these factors, all right? And there's a score sheet at the bottom, and what is it? 5 points, 4 points, what is it? 5, 4, 3, 2, 0, all right? So just put a number in each one of those. Take a minute or so. No cheating. Any number is agreeable. Nobody's going to grade you on it, by the way, and I'm not picking them up, all right? What I want you to do is kind of, I'll probably go around the room and ask a few people to just share your idea about how you graded your community in general. Or pick one point and say, well, this is what I think they do really, what do they do really well and what do they do not so well? So we got Macokota here, we got Clinton here, and we have Dubuque here, right? So.
And Cheryl.
Oh, okay. So let's see, in order of importance, is there a Clinton person who would volunteer to talk about one of the factors that they thought your community is doing really well on and one that you're not doing well on? Oh, I can see this is really exciting.
You got two people that neither one of us live in the community.
That's all right, do it for you. All right, you don't live in Clinton, right? But you go to church in Clinton.
Right.
That's all right. But you're an outsider looking in, right? How do you, yeah, well,
Well, I live like presently 6 miles away from Clinton,
okay,
so I go to Clinton a lot.
okay, so you're,
I would think that for me that I see happening is the existing business appreciation.
yes.
There is great publicity
Ah,
all the time, and word of mouth gets along. And I've seen it in churches that will, advertise current events that are going on in the community.
yeah,
I see it on storefronts, that they'll put placards on the
Yeah.
storefronts. It's in the newspaper, it's
Yeah.
on the radio, there's a couple local radio stations that broadcast it.
okay,
And I have a very close friend is a small business owner, and she's just amazed at the, not the type, but the amount of, traffic she gets because someone's heard about it on the radio
is that right?
or in the newspaper.
So is it lending to a community that's becoming far more, energetic in and of itself? I mean, how is the rest of the community looking at it?
I
Yeah.
don't know, with
You're the outsider walking in, right?
Yeah, and I just see that part of it, basically, I don't really see the whole
Okay.
gamut.
But you shop at the stores, right?
Right?
Okay, what you supporting? How about you?
Just had a great example of how relationships work in
Yeah.
a small community. A reception for a funeral just fell through last week. And
Yeah.
so a member of the church called a local deli and bakery
Yeah,
through knowing them for years and years, and had that bakery cater the entire funeral reception even though the bakery was closed that day.
Wow. Boy, now that's called looking at the community as the family, part of a family, all right? Which, to my way of thinking, is a really strong suit. That's cool. All right. All right, so where's Dubuque now? Who's from Dubuque here? All right.
Well,
What?
the one, that I preserving the past, I think that's one of the things that we've done better than most.
Yep.
The rest of them I gave a C minus, the best. There was one man, John Groneman,
Yeah.
who came up with the idea of preserving the old buildings, saving them.
Cool.
And so, the amount of destruction that occurred through urban renewal in the 1960s began to slow down, and John brought it back, and we bought into it. Our church, St. John's Episcopal, is right in some of the center of this development. And I think it's brought tourism,
Yes.
it certainly brought people forward as leaders, not, that have added to it,
Yep.
and I'm hoping our church.
Yeah. Well, it's setting a good framework. The last time I was in Dubuque was when I can remember, do they do that film festival
Yes.
still?
Going on.
Yeah, it was like, all right, I was there with a group of the Iowa Renaissance group, and this was probably 8 years ago, and we took over, what is it? The Julian Dubuque had just been redone or something like that, is that,
Oh
is
my
it-
gosh.
right, and,
The seventh year.
and I was just, and I was just like shocked at the changes that had taken place in Dubuque.
And then the waterfront
Yes.
development.
I mean,
another
that's,
big piece of
yeah.
it.
And by the way,
Warehouse district is the main example.
Yeah.
growing.
it to me, Dubuque put the energy into making a lot of stuff start to happen. And I think, I can't remember who I do remember that the paper was involved in some of that stuff. I don't know if it's still around, but I assume it is. Yeah, the Telegraph Herald was part of, there was a whole group of folks that I recall got involved in a lot of that.
20 years ago, there were big billboards, when the last person leaves Dubuque.
Right,
they take
exactly.
the light off.
So,
And it's completely reversed. They have this community development group, and
Yes.
they have exceeded every one of their expectations in terms of additional employment, the level of pay for the employment that they do have, the new housing starts, it's just incredible, the changes that's taken place.
when you can appreciate this, I gave this presentation to those guys a bunch of years ago, or at one point. But they really, whoever pulled, I remember the paper was involved, because I did a lot of work for the Newspaper Foundation. And I just think the whole leadership thing must have changed too. And I wasn't, and it probably is young, old, broad-based employment, et cetera. So it can happen, so,
And it's also money.
yeah, oh,
The existing business leaders got together and
it's,
they pooled money.
Yep.
And they founded a foundation, they did all kinds of.
well, but they also had a vision.
that vision.
I think they had the vision and then said, how do we make it happen? And then the answer becomes a lot easier. But if you don't have the vision to start with, it's very hard. All right, what about Macokota? Any comment here?
Yes, it's doing quite well.
Yes.
Of late, we've got a lot of turnover, buildings being occupied
Yep.
and renewed. Our entire front Main Street has had a tremendous growth, and I think it's affecting a lot of the people. Of course, there's always that little fear that goes on, oh my God, who's gonna pay for it?
Right.
But
Well,
I think in the long run,
it's also that fear of things we call change.
oh yes.
Oh, God.
Yes.
It's like, let us all figure out how to embrace change. And it's going at such a rapid rate, we got, oh my God, it's like, so,
I've been working on a project in Coconut to build or purchase a building and develop it for a community cover for food stuff.
absolutely,
And it's been an interesting eye-opener to how leaders work in this community. At the same time we're attempting to do this, there's a football stadium. at the
yes,
high school.
right, there's all these competing things, right?
The 4-H people are building the new center at this fairgrounds.
Yeah.
And literally, the community's got together
That tells you put the energy behind the vision of what
Doesn't
they.
mean that there are not some naysayers.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, no, listen, guess what? I have never wound up working in a community that weren't naysayers. You know, guess what? The only way you can handle the naysayers, acknowledge, listen to them, and go on.
And that's
All right.
what they're doing.
Huh?
And that's one of the things they're doing. They're
Yeah,
also
I mean,
bringing in-
you can't let this little minority of negative impact what is a genuinely beautiful vision for the future. So,
That and the communication that they're putting out that's going not just in the area, but in reaching out through the Macokota area,
what is it,
what do they call it? Community,
Macokota Area Development Company or?
Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, all right, so much of that comes down to it's not being controlled by 2 or 3 people. It's now a much wider group involving different age groups, different demographics, et cetera. So,
You know, I think the interesting thing about what you're talking about, building communities,
yeah,
the church, individual congregations are communities.
right,
And how important some of the things you're saying are to
Right.
exactly what it means to build a community. I remember being in Freeport, Illinois,
yeah,
and convinced the vestry to start a long-term planning process.
yeah,
And, but the one thing I knew from the very start was, don't have the vestry do the long-range.
right, exactly.
Have a committee of the real leaders, and
Right.
the real leaders, none of whom were on the vestry.
Right, exactly.
Were leaders in the community and
Yeah.
leaders in industry,
Yeah.
and we got them together, and we didn't go to the parish and just ask what needed. We
Right.
went to the community, we had the sheriff's office, the probation office,
Yeah.
the superintendent of schools come in and
Yeah.
talk about the problem. And then we built up a program and built a huge addition to the building and, to basically serve the needs of, that were identified in the survey.
Well, I think that point, go ahead.
I think these are great discussions, we can carry on into the afternoon.
Oh, okay,
Break up into, and those of you with very specific interest in our engagement in the community and with the community, hopefully will be able to continue this conversation. I just want to add that the one interesting thing that probably you don't know is I would ask you to guess what was this center before it got, is it upgraded or is it rebuilt? What do you think?
I have absolute, huh?
No idea. What do you think sat?
Was
what do
it
you think
like a
sat on
medical-
this land?
Hmm.
Just the rectory sat on.
Oh,
this
the
land.
record,
And the people decided that they were going to pull down the rectory
and,
and they built
Right.
this beautiful space.
Yeah.
Not just for themselves,
but for the whole community, see, I think
It's
that's,
literally the only church that has a handicapped accessible building.
isn't that right? Wow,
And
well,
so it's
somebody's
used
thought
by-
process went into that.
4-H program, it's
Yeah.
used by all, for wedding, baptismal, all kinds of
Yep.
different things.
All right, you guys, you got the idea. I'll call this to a halt. You got enough here to talk about. This afternoon, I'm going to do maybe 2 things, is to tell you how we start the process in a community, and also how we've done it with churches. Just so, you know, and you can make that choice. Thank you.